Alright, so today I'm going to be going over how to conduct the experiment with the pendulum that we're going to be using to measure the acceleration due to gravity. So there are two quantities we need to measure in order to calculate the acceleration due to gravity. There's the length of the pendulum, and then there's the period of the pendulum. So for this pendulum, this is what we'll be using in class. Obviously, those of you doing this at home, you may not have this. This is just a photocopied protractor with some lines extended. If you have a protractor, you can use that to check the angle, but all we're going to be using this for is to make sure that we aren't using too great of an angle. So these extended lines are each 5 degrees. So this is 15 degrees, and as I went over, from the small angle or because we're using the small angle approximation, we should keep the angle under 15 degrees. So when we're conducting the experiment, you just want to release it from there or lower. You can estimate that at home, or you can, use a protractor to estimate it as well. It doesn't have to be super exact. Just, don't start with the pendulum way up. Start with it somewhere reasonably far down because you don't want too large of an angle. But first, let's go over measuring the length. So here I'm using a 50-gram cylindrical mass. Because in the calculation for this, we treated this as a point object. Obviously, it is not actually a point, it has extent. So we need to find the middle of this. So those of you at home, you want to use something that's got a fairly simple shape so that you can measure to the middle of it. So a cylindrical object, a cube-like object, or a circular object. It's pretty easy to figure out where the center of those are. If you have some strangely shaped object that you're trying to use for your pendulum, it becomes difficult to estimate where the center is. But for this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a meter stick, try to measure from the center of the pivot point of the pendulum at the top to the bottom and the top of this cylinder. So if I measure the bottom and the top and take the average, I'll get where the center is. It's kind of hard to eyeball where the center of the cylinder is. So we'll just take the bottom and the top. So, do your best. Obviously, you're measuring a long distance here, and it's hard to be super precise, but so this I would say is 95.15 and 97.45. Anyway, and that's in centimeters. But numbers don't exactly matter. Obviously, yours will be different. Your pendulum should be approximately a meter long. That's a good length to use for this. Also, obviously, if you're using a meter stick and it's over a meter, you'll have a hard time measuring it. So it should be just a bit under a meter. And so the next thing we're going to do is, again, let the pendulum oscillate at about 15 degrees. And as I talked about before, it's best to start your measurement with it at a maximum and then wait for it to come back to a maximum. But you don't have to catch it and release it every time. It will, continue oscillating. So here I have a timer. If you have a timer, that's fine. If you don't, you've got a cell phone, and most cell phones have a timer, so you could just use, your phone timer, or one on your computer, whatever you have. For those of you at home, I'm sure you can find something to time it with. But anyway, so like I said, you want to, obviously if it starts hitting something, you want to start it again. And if it starts, it will eventually start going in like elliptical paths. You want to keep it fairly straight. It doesn't matter that much, but just make sure, it's not running into anything. So I'll let go of this, and when it comes to the maximum on the side towards me, I'm just going to start the timer. So start, stop. And so I got 1.91 seconds. So I would record that, and then I can reset my timer, and then without touching it again, I can just wait until it's at this maximum, start, stop. Got exactly the same thing again. And you want to be recording these into a spreadsheet. And so, start, stop. That time I got 1.81. So you're going to take approximately 50 measurements like that. Obviously, that's a lot of measurements, but it should only take you a couple minutes. I mean, you can, even with recording and restarting the timer, you can take a measurement every 5 or 10 seconds. So 50 minutes should only take you a few minutes. So another thing is, you don't want to, as long as you think your measurement was started and stopped at relatively the right time, you want to keep it. If you, for example, lose track and start it there and then it's way past and you're like, oh, stop, and then you get something that you know for a fact was not a good recording, you don't need to keep that. You would end up excluding that at the end anyway. But don't delete things just because they differ from your previous measurements by a bit. Only if you clearly use the stopwatch incorrectly or like lost track of where you started and stopped. So that's about it for the recording of the data and what you need to measure for this lab.